There are two things in this world that go hand in hand with childhood: video games and scary horror movies. Those great times when staying up late and being in front of the TV, scared to death at what was happening on the screen as you played X-Men on the NES. And then there were the scary movies. Just like peanut butter and jelly, cookies and milk, these two were destined to clash and merge when gaming began its meteoric rise in the early 80s. Sit back, turn down the lights, and grab a nice drink, because this video is going to cover the history of horror gaming throughout the years. So I have broken up this topic into two videos to keep the length of it under an hour, and we'll cover mostly the popular, well-known titles of the time. Part 1 here will cover the years up to the 5th generation of consoles, meaning up to the PlayStation 1 era. Just as a quick note, I will not be covering the Odyssey 1 Haunted House overlay game from 1972 because, I mean, look at it. It's a piece of plastic film that statically clings to the TV set. I mean, what the hell am I supposed to do with that? Anyway, the Angry Video Game Nerd did an awesome video on it, and you should check that one out. However, if you were technically going to point out the first game based on a horror theme, you can't overlook this here. It was like having a board game on your TV at a time when Wi-Fi was still 35 years out and computers were the size of a freaking house. Something had to fill the time. Also, keep an eye out on the bottom of the screen right here, as I will be posting little trivia notes with each game that I go over.
But enough talk! How about you?
The 1970s produced some of the most iconic horror movies that still hold their own today. The Exorcist, The Hills Have Eyes, Halloween, Alien, and Texas Chainsaw Massacre, just to name a few. With Atari slowly rising in the late 70s, it was only a matter of time before one of these movies would land on the popular VCS console. I mean, it was inevitable. Think about it, Purina freaking Dog Chow had a game on the VCS. Dog food. So why not a horror movie? But before any of these movies would hit the Atari in the early 80s, this computer game right here beat them all to the punch. Mystery House is considered to not only be the first graphical adventure game, but also one of the first horror video games, period. The legendary Roberta Williams came up with the story and idea for this game while her husband Ken helped with programming it. Before this title came out, story-driven games were all text-based. With this specific title, Roberta revolutionized gaming, and the game's popularity kickstarted what would become the Sierra Company. The game had you exploring an abandoned house and typing out what actions you would take during this adventure, a sign of things to come. Atari would eventually get into the horror game when they released Haunted House in 1982. The game took a very simple approach. What if you were stuck inside a haunted house and all you could see were your cartoony eyes amid a light glow from a candle that you can't see in the game? The box art looks amazing, and I had a better time staring at the box art versus playing the game. It was also a much easier approach to a horror game when compared to Mystery House, but it was a glimpse of what a haunted setting could look like in a game on the Atari. The Alien movie took the horror genre and put it in space. So what would Atari do with that? Make a Pac-Man clone out of it. It was a poor attempt at a game for such an iconic horror movie. And I get that the Atari and technology in general was still new and extremely limited during that time, but I feel this is a wasted opportunity. However, the truly sad part here is that it is a Pac-Man ripoff that is actually better than the actual Pac-Man game that Atari made. Let that one sink in for a few seconds. Developer VSS would soon make waves when they released Texas Chainsaw Massacre in early 1983. It was highly controversial due to the fact that you were now in control of the killer and not playing as the hero or even a victim. It was a new spin to the young genre, but not one that was welcomed by vendors. The game, it's a mess. Again, limited not only by technology, but also in effort. If you played it, you would soon realize that Leatherface is a mess to control, and any little thing in your way, as small as a single pixel, stops you right in your track. There's also no levels in the game, you just scroll back and forth on the screen. You were better off being chased by an actual guy with a chainsaw. The video game controversy, however, was not over. That same year, Micrographic Image released Halloween for the Atari. Only this time around, you were playing as the babysitter, not Michael Myers, as he was the one chasing you throughout the house and the children. At least this one had different rooms, even though they looked the same except for the colors. And if Michael happens to get his hands on one of the kids, well, they look like they got run over by a freaking truck. This one also had the vendors worried and was taken off the shelves. Looking back at these games, it's no wonder that the video game crash of '83 occurred. Dracula on the Intellivision was a breath of fresh air. You got to play as the ghoulish vampire stalking your victims in a neighborhood in the middle of the night. You could turn into a bat as well, but only for a short period of time, or a bird of some type would just come out and just kill you. Hey, I didn't say it would make sense, only that it was different. Over on the arcade side, Sinistar was making waves as a horror-based space shooter with synthesized speech, letting arcade players know what was in store for those brave enough to play it. This game terrified me as a kid, and I would walk away from it when I heard the words, "I live." It is one of the few arcades that I never played as a kid because I actually found it scary, and the game alone was hard as hell. But that Sinistar screaming at you as he quickly chased you down the play area was a thing of nightmares. I hunger, coward, beware, I live. The 80s had started with some controversies, but with the crash of '83, Atari and some of the other companies were out, and a new kid by the name of Nintendo was in. The gaming landscape was getting a fresh start, and horror games would be a part of this digital renaissance as the third generation of gaming began. Mario, where are you? Now, many great and iconic horror flicks would litter the 1980s. Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th, The Thing, Poltergeist, The Lost Boys, Witchboard. I could go on, but let me just get this out of the way. Why in God's green earth was there never a video game released that was based on the Monster Squad? Are you kidding me? Someone took the Goonies premise and mixed it in with famous monsters from literature, and yet no one picked this up for a video game. To this day, I'm flabbergasted. Can someone out there please make a game on this movie? Please. By midnight, they won't seem so young anymore. The Monster Squad. Nintendo's lockout chip and seal of approval meant that they had almost full control of what would be released on their new console. And with the meteoric rise of the platforming genre, console horror games would soon follow that trend. Ghosts 'n Goblins was the first early title to take advantage of this trend. It was an arcade port, and pretty good one at that. I have heard others out there criticize this port, and I can't understand for the life of me why. It's a very early NES title when the developers were still learning the bells and whistles of the NES board. The music is great, the scrolling is smooth, and the difficulty is brutal. But this title right here was my first taste of a horror-themed game on the NES, and I was impressed, and I'm sure so were others. In 1986, Konami brought us Castlevania. If Ghosts 'n Goblins was the appetizer on the NES, Castlevania felt like the full-course meal. The graphics, the music, everything felt like it came together in a perfect storm. Of course, back then we had no idea, but this right here was the starting point of one of the greatest horror franchises until Konami dropped everything and went off to sell pachinko machines. Thank you, Konami. This game brought in a bunch of legendary horror creatures and figures from all circles of literature and had you fighting them one by one as you made your way up the castle to fight the ultimate bloodsucker of them all. Sorry, wrong picture. Hold on. There we go. Why is it that I'm more terrified of the first picture? Moving on the arcade side, Exidy released Chiller, a gory and grotesque light gun game that had you shooting victims that were tied and bound in torture devices. Not all the levels were like this, but the first two were, and I think that's what Exidy was going for, shock factor here. You had a timer, and you had to inflict as much damage as possible. Most arcade owners refused to carry this cabinet in their location, and finding one out in the wild back then was like finding gold. The NES did get a port, however, but it was an unlicensed game from American Game Cartridges here in the US. Exidy pushed the envelope here, yet for all that gore, nothing came of it. It would take a few more years before Congress would go on a witch hunt that would alter the gaming landscape, but more on that later on in this video. Maniac Mansion would usher a new system to the gaming landscape when it arrived in 1987. Originally developed around the Commodore 64 architecture, it would soon be ported to many other computers and even the NES, where I first played it. You could now point to a word at the bottom of the screen to complete an action. This point-and-click system would open up the floodgates for other companies to jump into the genre. LucasArts had brought a comedic spin with a B-movie twist to the horror genre, and it was a hit. I love this game. Still do. In the late 1980s, the 16-bit generation was just around the corner. FMV games were still a new horizon barely explored by the likes of games like Dragon Slayer, but Worlds of Wonder decided to release a console that will be dedicated to full motion video on VHS tapes. Oh, this is not going to end well. That meant that the replay value on these games, or VHS movies, was about the same as playing tic-tac-toe. I will go over this unique system in a future video. It had 5 games, movies, that came out for it. One of them was a horror-based game called The Rescue of Pop's Ghostly. It was a real cheesy venture through a haunted house as you shot at the screen circles to see how high of a score you could achieve. Looking at it now, it looks extremely dated and overall low quality. Back then, it was seen as extremely dated and overall low quality. But it was an interesting experiment, to say the least. We would have to wait a few more years for FMV to really bring out the good games. I'm sorry.
Speaking of bats, look out, Gordy!
In the arcades, Namco went for shock factor when they released Splatterhouse in 1988. They grabbed inspiration from many horror films and created a game with plenty of action to match the gore and disturbing visuals. Some out there speculate that the game was never meant to be released here in the United States officially. It would explain why his mask was changed to red when it was released for the TurboGrafx-16. However, it doesn't explain how both Part 2 and 3, released on the Genesis, kept the white mask, so I'm kinda confused on that. The following year, Friday the 13th was released on the NES, but with the widespread popularity of the NES, most of us grew up hating this title. But hear me out. This is not the atrocity most out there are quick to point out. The game is brutal, very brutal, but once you get the controls and the mechanics down, it can be a very enjoyable game. You have plenty of different counselors, each with specific strengths and weaknesses. The map or the overworld navigation is a bit strange to get used to, but it only takes a few minutes to actually kind of comprehend of how it works. And it even has some parallax scrolling. The third-person views are not very well done, I admit, but I think that its greatest enemy was that it was too ambitious for its time. It had too many great ideas that were just not executed properly. But it is fun to play once you get over that hump at the very beginning. Nightmare on Elm Street came out in 1985 and turned the horror movie genre on its head. A boogeyman with razors for fingers on one hand that comes after you in your sleep. That's freaking awesome. It was rumored that the prototype of the game had you playing as Freddy and you went around killing kids. Pretty sure that the Halloween and Texas Chainsaw Massacre controversies affected Rare's decision to not go that route. If you want a more thorough look at this game, check out my Halloween marathon from last year, day number 8, where I go over this title along with a special guest star. Not the best game, but I think it plays rather well when compared to other movie licensed games. In 1989, the fourth generation of gaming began with the release of the Sega Genesis and the TurboGrafx 16 here in the States. But the 8-bit generation still had one more treasure for horror fans before the decade and the console era would give way to the new. Sweet Home, a game that was made in conjunction with a Japanese horror movie of the same name. It was an interesting take. Here you had a game that was created not only about a horror movie, but in conjunction with it. The Japanese-only Famicom game took an RPG approach that had you exploring a haunted mansion while choosing and swapping members of your team as you ventured deeper into it. Strategy also played a vital role as you had to determine who could accompany you and who would stay behind as you explored and battled evil creatures at every turn. This title will go on to inspire many developers in the following years and help usher in one of the most iconic horror franchises in the coming years. Of course, such a great game was Japanese exclusive, of course, it makes sense. God forbid that we would get such a great game here. Oh no. How can we when we got such awesome titles like Beetlejuice? Freaking Beetlejuice. Thank you, LGN. Let's publish Beetlejuice, because we sure as hell needed another mediocre, no wait, not mediocre, barely mediocre platforming game where it is so painful. The 90s were now underway. Games in general were about to go through another tech change, this time FMV, but on a medium that the music industry had embraced a few years earlier, the CD. That, coupled with the rising PC market, would usher in a new generation of horror games to enjoy. In 1992, Frederick Reynard, did I pronounce that right? Over in Infogrames, designed Alone in the Dark, the first fully 3D survival horror game. The 3D engine was created specifically for that game, and Frederick was a huge fan of horror movies and wanted to bring that same suspense and terror-like atmosphere to this game. The result is a horror game that is mostly overlooked when speaking about the horror survival genre, especially when compared to a certain game that's gonna make the list here shortly. This game right here is not it. Nope, not even close. Night Trap for the Sega CD was popularized for all the wrong reasons. Sure, it utilized FMV footage to tell the story of teenage girls invited to a mansion to be used as feeding ponds for beings that are supposed to be vampires but look like small budget evil pesticide workers from Orchid. As the player, it is your duty to keep the girls safe by setting off traps and keeping the vampires away from them. I remember looking at this game and I was like, oh wow, look, Dana Plato, I remember her. Then politicians who had nothing better to do with their time went after this game, stating that it was promoting violence towards women. Nowhere in this game is this even remotely evident. The whole point of the game is to protect the girls from the vampires. How about you people play the game before you criticize it?
Hey, can I use this closet? Oh, sure, go ahead. Okay. Hey, Sarah, where's your bedroom? Oh, it's downstairs. Yeah, this place seems awfully large. Do you have a big family? No, it's just my parents, my brother, and me. But you never know who might drop in.
Plus, the whole game is very B-movie campy. It's very cheesy and not very good. But thanks to some stupid people in Congress at that time, we ended up with the ESRB. Why? Because of a game like this? One cannot speak about games in general in the 1990s and overlook Doom in the pantheon of not only gaming, but among the horror gaming genre. It was not the first 3D style shooter ever, but it brought attention to the PC market like never before. The kick-ass music, the action-packed levels, the designs, the enemies, it was pure heaven, actually pure hell. The horror genre had its killer app to start the 90s, and what a hell of a game to do so. And if the single-player campaign wasn't enough for you, it brought along the ability to play via modem play or local LAN. Nothing says Doom like multiplayer with your friends and this sound. Ah, good old times. If Doom popularized the shooter horror genre, Seventh Guest did the same just for the CD format. You see, once upon a time, the CD drive on a PC was a fancy add-on, with developers quickly finding interesting ways to use it for gaming purposes. Seventh Guest used it to create a semi-motion video experience where the player would explore a mysterious house alongside other guests, unraveling interactive puzzles while conversing with the guests that would allow you to uncover more of the story as you progressed further into the game. The result was an experience that was not only eerie, but groundbreaking as well. This title cemented the potential of what the new CD medium could do when in the right hands. Roberta Williams struck again in the mid-90s with Phantasmagoria, a game that shows you what Night Trap and other FMV type games could have been like, if they were good. Be warned though, this game is very gory and has some highly controversial scenes which I'm not going to get into on this video. The game spanned 7 discs, utilized a FMV style approach to your character in general, full FMV segments, and mixed all that in with a point-and-click adventure. This game was one of the highest selling PC games of 1995, even with all the controversy surrounding it, and showed that the CD medium was ripe with possibilities when it came to proper game design.
There's gonna be a sacrifice. In the end, you're gonna have to use your wits. Yeah.
In 1996, Capcom unleashed Biohazard to the world. Alone in the Dark invented the genre, and this game right here popularized it when it came out on the PlayStation. Survival horror just got FMV'd. Those cutscenes, they were so bad, but they are a blast to look at. The dialogue is atrocious.
No! Don't go!
The tank-like controls are a pain in the ass, but for some reason, I don't know why, we gamers could not get enough of that. The ability to play as 2 different characters was also a great feature and added replayability in the long run. This game was inspired by Sweet Home, but since Capcom had lost the rights to that property, they came up with the Resident Evil universe instead. Thank you, Capcom. Because of this, we got...
Find anything, Jill?
Nothing. What is this all about? I can't figure it out at all.
Beats me, too.
Now it's Wesker's time to disappear.
And if Resident Evil popularized survival horror, then this next title brought a psychological side to horror gaming not seen before. Silent Hill was, and probably still is, one of the most disturbing games I have ever played. This game combined gore in a setting that put the gamer on edge at all times. The scarce ammo and fog-like environment lent to that effect. You weren't sure what was around the corner, with some sections of the game having a full 3D type movement to it that gave it a movie-like feel to it. It was a horror game done right, swapping action for puzzles and limiting your visibility to remind us all that when done right, we get games like Silent Hill. Over on the PC side, FMV was still all the rage, but one company decided to keep things somewhat simple by staying with the point-and-click mechanic, yet infused horror and a haunting soundtrack to their new game. Diablo was the result. It took the horror theme and placed it in a medieval setting and combined it with a point-and-click style inside a rogue-like dungeon crawler to create one of the best games of 1996. This game was actually one of my first eBay purchases ever, and I scooped it up for $25, complete and boxed, and I loved every minute of it. You had a task to do. Enter the ever-deepening dungeons and battle your way through hordes of hell to get to Diablo himself, one dungeon floor at a time. To think that we started with this right here, and in 16 years, we got to this point. The leap in technology meant designers could now start to more properly flesh out their ideas and create whole worlds that would embrace that vision. And gamers were lucky enough to go on that scary ride. The only question now was, what new genre or trend would they come up with next? With that said, this brings part 1 of the Horror History series to an end. Part 2 will follow in 2 weeks, but fear not, another video awaits to those that are brave enough to return before that. In the meantime, keep watching, keep gaming, and don't turn off all the lights. You never know what is beyond the darkness.